Hello viewers, welcome to Divine Consulting. My name is Lucky Igwe. Before I proceed with today's topic, please subscribe to my channel so that you'll be the first to be notified when a new video is released. Today, we'll be looking at POA&M management. POA&M management. Plan of action and milestone is a CA5 control. It is used to document any identified vulnerabilities, and it's also used to track those vulnerabilities to remediation. What are some of the activities that precedes POA&M creation and management? POA&Ms are created based on vulnerabilities that are identified on the vulnerability scan report and the controls that failed during the course of the security control assessment, controls that are listed as other than satisfied on the security assessment report. There are various templates that are used to create a POA&M and manage a POA&M, as well as there are various security assessment tools, GRC tools, that are used for POA&M management. The table right here is an example of a POA&M template. Like I said earlier, the POA&M has different templates out there and different software security assessment tools that are used for POA&M management. So if you're doing it the manual way, this is an example of a POA&M template. So like I said, there are multiple templates out there, different versions of POA&M templates out there. So to my left hand side is the POA&M ID. Every POA&M should have a POA&M ID. If you are using a GRC tool or a security assessment tool, the tool will automatically generate a POA&M ID for you. So we have our POA&M ID as 101, POA&M ID 101. Now the next column is security control. This is where you document the security control, that is security control of the vulnerability that failed. So you document it right there, so we can see that CP4 is one of the security controls that failed during the course of the security control assessment. The next column is the weakness. The weakness is the name of the security control that failed. Every security control has a name. So CP4 is known or is called contingency testing or contingency plan testing. So the next column is the description. So the description describes, the control that failed. It describes the vulnerability. It describes the control that failed. The findings from the security control assessment. What the security control assessment found out when he or she was conducting a security control assessment. So now, under the description, we can see that the assessor documented that no evidence was provided to confirm the completion of a contingency plan test. No evidence was provided to confirm the completion of the contingency plan test. That is the finding, from the security control assessment. The next column is the severity level. The severity level for this vulnerability is identified as a moderate impact vulnerability. Moderate impact vulnerability. Now the next column shows us the cost. Now, the cost that I have here is $500. This is just an example. I'm not saying that it's going to cost $500 to conduct a contingency plan test and to actually remediate this vulnerability. But I just put an amount there just for the sake of this training. Now, on some POA&M templates, you will see beside the cost, you will see the justification. The justification actually tells you how they arrived at the $500. Some could say that it's going to cost us 10 hours, multiplied by $50 an hour. So that could be their own justification. It's going to cost us 10 hours to remediate this vulnerability, and that 10 hours could be spread over the period of maybe 3, 4, 5 days, because the ISSO or whoever will be delegated to remediate the vulnerability, we have other tasks that he or she is working on. Except this point, except they have a team called the vulnerability management team that all they do is to review vulnerability scan reports, create points, and track vulnerabilities to remediation. So I'm just saying, in a standard situation whereby it's an ISSO or it's someone else that has other responsibility aside from POA&M management. So the number of hours could be spread over 3, 4, 5 days a week, depending on how long. So they could say, okay, it's going to cost us 10 hours to remediate this vulnerability, and it's going to cost us $50 an hour, because that's how much I'm being paid an hour. So all these are just examples. So now the next column is the point of contact. The point of contact. The point of contact could be the system owner. Some agencies, some government agencies, organizations do have it that the system owner's name should be documented as a point of contact, on the POA&M report. So some organizations will say, okay, the ISSO's name should be documented, as the point of contact, for the vulnerability. Now, we have the point of contact as an example as James Bond. James Bond, this is just an example, So now the next column is the planned start date. The planned start date. This is the date that you, as the point of contact, plan to either, you could be the one that will, remediate the vulnerability, or you could be the one that will coordinate with the technical team to make sure that the vulnerabilities or the vulnerability is remediated. So the planned start date talks about the date you plan, you anticipate to kick off with the remediation of the vulnerability. Now comes the planned finish date. So the planned start date that we have here is February 8, 2021. February 8, 2021. Now, we have the planned finished date. The planned finish date. So the planned finish date is the date that you plan to complete the remediation of the vulnerability. So the planned finish date also goes by the duration of time based on the agency policy to remediate the vulnerability. Now, every agency have their own policy. Some agency may say, okay, any identified vulnerabilities that is identified as a moderate impact vulnerability should be remediated within 60 days. Some agency will say any identified vulnerabilities that is identified as a moderate impact should be remediated within 90 days. So it all depends on the agency, that you are actually, that you are employed with or you are contracting for. Now, we have the planned finish date as 4/8/2021. So if we do the math, that's like roughly 60 days. And all these are examples. They are not the real thing. Now, we have the next column as the milestone. The milestone. So the milestone is the plans you have in place to remediate the vulnerability, the actions. The course of action. What is your next line of action to make sure that the vulnerability identified is remediated? So that is the milestone. So the milestone here states that tabletop exercise is scheduled for February 9, 2021 to satisfy the control requirement. And some other people may have their milestone documented differently. This is just an example. So you could, document, you could have a different milestone, for your own CP4 control. Now, the next column is the actual start date. The actual start date. Remember, earlier I talked about the planned start date. The planned start date is the date you anticipate to kick off with the POA&M, with the vulnerability remediation. Now, the actual start date is the date you actually commence with the remediation of the vulnerability. Now, at times, the actual start date and the planned start date could be the same date. You could document the planned start date that, okay, I plan to kick off with the remediation of this vulnerability today. And you actually kick off with the remediation process today. Now, at times you could document it, oh, I plan to start today and something else happened and you could not actually, kick off with the remediation of the vulnerability the same day. So you may kick off with it, a different date. So we have the actual completion date. The actual completion date is the date the vulnerability is actually remediated and completed. The date the vulnerability, is actually being remediated is the actual completion date. Note that the actual completion date for this vulnerability that we are using as example for illustration is earlier than the planned finish date, because it does not mean that because you document that you remediate the vulnerability in 60 days, you have to wait till the end of that 60 days before you actually remediate the vulnerability. The vulnerability could be remediated earlier than 60 days. So that's why we have the actual completion date as February 19, 2021. So this is the date this identified vulnerability was actually completed. And you submit a request for a POA&M closure. Some organizations do have it that, let's say you are listed as the ISSO, on this POA&M, as the point of contact. Now, some organizations, kind of like give the ISSOs the power to actually close the POA&M. Some organization, the ISSO, we have to notify the system owner that the POA&M has been remediated and you are submitting a POA&M closure request. And before you submit a POA&M closure request, the assessor, we have to reassess the control to determine if the control was, has been, remediated. So a copy of the contingency plan test report we have to be submitted or provided to the ISSO as proof that a contingency plan test, was or has been completed. So the assessor, will now give you the go-ahead to close the POA&M. So if you are an ISSO and you have the ultimate power to just go ahead and close the POA&M without not reporting to somebody higher than your own level, you can just go ahead and close the POA&M. But some agency, you have to go through the system owner and send the system owner an email to let the system owner know that, oh, this POA&M ID so number CP4 control, has been remediated, and an evidence of the POA&M report is uploaded to the SharePoint or to whatever GRC tool that you all are using. It has been attached. You actually attach the POA&M report, the evidence to the POA&M. But if you are doing it if you're using a manual form like an Excel spreadsheet, you can actually upload the evidence to a SharePoint. So now you now send an email to the system owner to let the system owner know that the POA&M has been remediated and you are recommending the POA&M to be closed. Now that takes us to the status. So the status, once the system owner has reviewed the POA&M and he has looked at the evidence or the evidence that you use, to support the POA&M closure. Some people do report to the ISSM. Some people do report to the CISO, the Chief Information Security Officer. So once they have reviewed it and they looked at the evidence and they didn't feel that, okay, the evidence is enough to close the POA&M, they will go ahead and close the POA&M. Some agency will reply back to the ISSO to close the POA&M. So now that takes us to the status, which now shows completed. Some GRC tool or some security assessment tool will show the POA&M status as closed approved. In a situation whereby the POA&M is still in progress, the status will show in progress. It will show in progress. In a situation whereby a risk acceptance memo, was used or was approved, for the poem. So it's still going to come back. It's still going to show on the status column. It's going to show risk accepted, risk accepted on the status column. So it's going to show risk accepted. So now, if the poem is in progress, like I said, the actual completion date will not be documented. It will be blank because the poem is yet to be completed. So if the poem is in progress, the actual completion date will be blank, but you will have the actual start date, you have the planned finish date and the planned start date. So I hope this video is helpful. Please be sure to like my video and subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching.